So if you were here last week, you heard about one of Caleb's greatest moments ever on the stage at Grace Christian Church. Threw a piece of candy like 50 yards straight into a lady's hand. One of the greatest moments of my life. But I figured I would just balance that out this Sunday by also telling you about some of his worst moments on stage at Grace Christian, just to keep him humble, just to keep him on the ground. And so the first time I ever had him come up on stage at Grace, he didn't have to say a word. I told him, I was like, hey man, I'm gonna get up there. I'm gonna talk for about 5 minutes. And when I say the word life groups, all you have to do is going to be him and 5 other people. All you have to do is lead everybody else up on the stage when I say life groups. I'll talk for 5 minutes. It's just going to be right at the end. He's like, okay, I got it. He was so confident. He's like, man, you don't even have to tell me that. Don't worry about it, man. It's done deal. I said, good. Sounds great. So I get up there. I'm doing the announcements. And briefly into them, I'm talking about 45 seconds into them, I start, out of my peripheral, see people start walking toward the stage. And in my mind, I'm like, well, there's no possible way that's Caleb. So I start talking to this side of the room and over here. Well, then I turn back around, and here's Caleb just marching up. And then, like, they're on the stage, and so I'm like, man, you guys got to go sit back down. And so they had to go back down, sit back down. And like I said, I was 45 seconds into a 5-minute presentation there. And then so I keep going. About 4 minutes later, finally got to the moment, and I say the word life groups. And when I said life groups, I kind of glanced down, and Caleb was just sitting there, didn't move a muscle, didn't even think, wasn't even contemplating getting out of that chair. And so then I looked at him, and I was like, life groups. And he was like, right now? I'm like, yeah, right now. And so first time off to a rough start. But second time he gets on stage, very next week, they said, he told this story a few weeks ago, but it's pretty good, so I'm going to tell it again. And so, second time he was on stage, I was doing the announcements again. And I told them, they're like, hey, you're going to do it? And I was like, well, I want Caleb to do the announcements with me. And the leaders at Grace, I'll just be honest, they were like, we don't know about that. Like, is this real? Especially after last week, like, is this the best idea for him to get up there? Do you really think he's ready for this? And I was like, I do. Like, I will work with him. I'll make sure he's prepared, and he'll do a good job. And they said, okay. To obviously be nervous. And the longer you stand on stage without saying a word, the more those nerves are going to build. So you need to get up there and just hit the ground running. And I said, you need to start it and just come out with energy and make it happen. And he said, great. And so he gets up there, and what he was supposed to say is what we say here. Hey, good morning and welcome to Grace Christian Church. We are so glad that you're here. After you say hi to those around you, go ahead and grab a seat. But Caleb was very nervous. And so he got a little tongue-tied toward the end. And he said, good morning and welcome to Grace Christian Church. We are so glad that you're here. After you say hi to those around you, go to hell and grab a seat. And it was in that moment I thought, this is the guy I got to have on my staff. Like this is the type of boldness I'm looking for. No, afterwards I told him, I was like, man, I cannot believe you said that. And he was just like, what are you talking about? I was like, man, you told them to go somewhere. And he was like, I absolutely did not. And I was like, well, let's go back and watch it. And we went back and watched it, and he was just like, he felt awful. He was like, I cannot believe I said that. He was like, I feel terrible. And I was like, man, you should, because that was awful. You should feel terrible. So needless to say, Caleb's stage time at Grace was off to a very, very rough start. But moving forward, every single time I got on that stage at Grace, I told them, I was like, hey, Caleb is going to be up there with me. And one of the main reasons I did that, because I wanted him to know that I trusted him. Even after he cussed out the entire congregation, I wanted him to know that I still believed in him. That whether he got on the stage and he shined and it was great, or if he got on the stage and bombed and it didn't go well, I wanted him to know that, man, I've got your back. I'm in your corner. I trust you. Because it is easy to trust someone when things are going well. But trust is truly tested when things are not. Trust is not tested on the mountaintop, but trust is really tested in the valley. You won't know if you really trust your spouse until you go through your first big fight. You won't know if you really trust your coworker until you have a sharp disagreement. And you won't know if you really trust God until you go through the trials and the valleys of this life. Because it's easy to have faith in God when He's providing for your needs. But what happens when you lose your job? It's easy to have faith in God when you're in perfect health. But what happens when you get extremely sick? It's easy to have faith in God when your kids are well behaved. But what happens when one of them rebels and it breaks your heart? It's easy to have faith in God when you first get married and you're just in the little honeymoon phase. But what happens when you're 5 years in and your spouse is contemplating divorce? It's easy to have faith in God when God is answering your prayers. But what happens when you pray and things actually get worse? Trust is not tested on the mountaintop, but trust is truly tested in the valley. Anyone can have faith in God when He provides everything they could ever need. But it takes real, genuine faith to trust God even if He doesn't. As the hall of faith, because in Hebrews chapter 11, the author recounts all of the greatest stories of faith in the Bible. And these are the stories that we all know and we all were taught growing up in church, because these are the stories of God showing up and providing miracles for people in response to their faith. And so in Hebrews chapter 11, it starts off like this in verse 32. He says, "How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people," here's what they did for God, "overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back again from death." These are the stories that we teach in the Bible and that we celebrate, because this is how we want God to always respond to our faith. That when we have faith in Him, we want Him to miraculously make a way and respond to our faith and rescue us in mighty ways. Everybody wants to be on the A team of faith. And so you all remember this show back in the day, the A Team. Okay, so this was before my time, but help me out. So what was Mr. T's name? Nobody knows? Yes, BK? BA. There we go, BA. And the one over on the right was Face? What about the middle? Hannibal? What's the guy at the top? Murdoch. Okay, all right. So see, some of you all remember that. You remember that because these guys were heroes. And on that show, I'm sure many of y'all as kids, I grew up with Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles, but some of y'all watched the A-Team back in the day, and you're like, man, I want to be BA. I want to be Face. I want to be Hannibal, because they were heroes. because they specialized in doing the impossible. And when we read this first section in Hebrews chapter 11, that's what we see. We see that these people are the heroes of the Bible. That is who we want to be. That is how we want God to respond to our faith. So everybody wants to be a part of the A team of faith, but no one is signing up for the B team of faith. And so Hebrews 11, it gives all these examples of what I call the A team, but then it shifts gears in verse 35. And he says, but. So what he's saying is like, God did all these miraculous things for these people, but there's another group of people. And look at it. It says, but others. It doesn't say their names. They didn't go down as heroes. Their name wasn't in lights. It just says, but others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at, and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prisons. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half, and others were killed with the sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. We celebrate the A team of faith, and we all want to join it. But no one is signing up for this team. No one is signing up to join the B team of faith. And I promise you, these stories right there that we read about in the Bible and that you see in that section of Hebrews chapter 11, the B team of faith, they're not teaching these over in Kid City, because kids are not ready to hear about the B team of faith. And if we're being honest, many of us in here a lot of times aren't ready either, because so many times we have been taught that if we have faith and if we trust in God, then we are automatically going to be blessed with health and wealth and happiness. We've been taught that if we have faith, that we are always going to be a part of the A team. And God is always going to meet our needs the exact way that we want Him to. And it's true that we should pray and believe. This is exactly what we talked about last week, that our God is a way maker, that He will make a way where there is no way. And so as His followers, it is our response and our duty to pray and believe and have faith that He is going to work in our lives in miraculous ways. But we also have to accept the fact that sometimes His answer is going to be no. And this is where faith is tested, because it's easier to have faith when you're on the A team. It's easier to trust God when He shows up when you need Him and He helps you slay the giant and He rescues you from the lion's den. But what about when you trust God and He doesn't rescue you, but instead you go through pain? What about when you trust God and He doesn't deliver you, but instead you suffer? And I'm sure we've all been there. I'm sure we've all, at some point in our lives, been a part of the B team of faith. But to me, the B team is way more impressive than the A team, because the B team had what I call even if faith. And so in Daniel chapter 3, the Israelites had been taken captive by the Babylonians, and so they're all living in Babylon under the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar was just an egomaniac. And so one day he decides that he's going to build this 90-foot golden statue, and he puts it right smack dab in the middle of Babylon. And he makes this decree. He says, when my musicians start playing, I don't care who you are, I don't care what you're doing, when my musicians start playing and you hear the music, you are to stop what you are doing, and you are to bow down, and you are to worship this golden statue. The punishment is that you will be thrown into the fiery furnace. But even though that was the punishment, there were 3 Hebrew young men that refused to bow down and worship King Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue. That when the music would start playing, everyone else in Babylon would get down, and they would face this golden statue. And they would start bowing down and worshiping this golden statue. And it wasn't just the Babylons who were doing this, but it was all of the other Israelites. Everyone else in Israel would bow down and worship this golden statue, except for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so in Daniel chapter 3, it says, after they refused to do this, it says, then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. So notice that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego believed, and they had faith that God was able to rescue them, even though it would have taken a miracle. The punishment was being thrown into a furnace. So the only way they're going to be rescued is an absolute miracle. They fully believed that God would show up and perform that miracle and rescue them and deliver them from Nebuchadnezzar. And so they look at the king and they say, listen, hey, our God is able. And we fully believe and have faith in him that he is going to rescue us. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego also knew that sometimes God's answer is no. That sometimes God's will is not our will. So they look at the king and they say, listen, our God is able and we believe with all of our hearts he will rescue us. But here's what they say in verse 18, so powerful. They say, Majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had even if faith. They fully believed that God was going to rescue them. But they said, even if he doesn't, we will still not bow down to anyone but him. They looked at King Nebuchadnezzar and they said, if God does rescue us and he does save us and we are on the A team, then he's going to get every ounce of our praise. But even if he doesn't, even if we burn up in this fire, even if we die a brutal death, our God is still going to receive every ounce of our praise. Yeah, give God praise this morning. They said, we are going to have faith in our God, even if. And if you and I are going to truly follow Jesus, if we're going to follow him until the very end, then the bottom line is that sometimes we are going to be on the B team of faith. And no matter how much you pray, and no matter what you do, sometimes God's answer is going to be no. Answer your prayers the way you want him to, but you are going to have to suffer. You're going to have to go through some heartache and some pain. And in those moments, the only way you're going to be able to keep fully and faithfully following Jesus is through having even if faith. That says, I'm going to have faith in God to give me a new job. But even if he doesn't, he is still my provider. I'm going to have faith in God that he's going to deliver me from my anxiety and depression. But even if he doesn't, he is still with me. I'm going to have faith in God that he is going to heal my body. But even if faith in God that he is going to restore my marriage. But if he doesn't, he still has a plan. I'm going to have faith in God that he is going to answer my prayers. But even if he doesn't, he is still faithful. And I'm going to have faith in God that he is going to bless my life. But even if I suffer and even if I go through more pain than I could ever possibly imagine, he is still worthy of every ounce of my praise. Yes, give God praise this morning. I have told you all before about my oldest son, Titus. And so this is And so Titus was born with a severe speech disorder. And many other delays came along with that. And I remember when he was just really a little boy, we took him to a specialist. We started noticing things were just not there. He wasn't hitting milestones. So we took him to a specialist, and they told us that, hey, there's a real possibility that your son is never going to be able to talk. There's a real chance that he'll never be able to verbally communicate to you or anyone else. And the weeks and months dealing with everything with Titus and navigating that, it's always been hard. In my life, I could not wrap my mind around, as a dad, could not wrap my mind around the fact my son may never be able to talk to me, never be able to communicate. And I was in denial at first. I thought, there's no way this is real, that God to be wrong. And then I just basically went through the 5 stages of grief, and I got angry at God. I got bitter. I said, God, how in the world could you allow this to happen to my son? I'm trying to serve you. I'm trying to love you, and you allow this to happen to my baby boy. And I was at a crossroads in my life. I had to answer the question, was I going to trust God or not? I wasn't going to fully walk away from him and the faith, but when it came to Titus, when it came to the thing that I cared about the most, the thing that was hurting me the most, was I going to trust him or not? Because trust is not tested on the mountaintop. Trust is tested in the valley. And Colby and I, my wife and I, we were in the darkest valley we had ever been in our lives. But I remember one day I was on a prayer walk, and I made my decision. And I prayed, God, I will never give up. That you are going to heal my son. Even I still cling to you. Even if this causes more pain and suffering, and to be honest with you, it has. Even if this causes more pain and suffering. And since then, God has moved. And by God's grace, Titus is growing and learning and talking. Now our biggest problem is we can't get him to shut up. But in almost every area of life, he is still significantly behind all of his peers. So I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I do know that I will never give up. I'm praying for that little boy. Stop believing that God is going to do more in and through him than we could ever possibly imagine. I am going to fully and faithfully follow Jesus, even if. And even though Jesus' answer may still be no, I want to remind you that he's still with you. And that he has never left your side. Because he never promised that you wouldn't go through the storm. He just promised you wouldn't go through the storm alone. And even if your pain and heartache and suffering lasts your entire life, I want to encourage you with the fact, the truth, that it will not last forever. That someday, very soon, the clouds will part and the trumpet will sound, and our Savior is going to come back. And he is going to make all things new. And he is going to wipe every tear from your eye once for all time. And all of the pain and the heartache and the suffering that you go through now cannot even compare to to the joy that is coming. Jesus, Lord, we magnify you in this moment, God, knowing that even when life is bad, you are still so good. God, so many things happen in our lives, Father, that we don't understand. So many things happen in our lives, Lord, that don't make sense to us. But God, I pray that you would meet us right where we're at, Father, right now. And you would help us to trust you even if. God, I pray that as a church we would be full of faith. We would be full of belief. And until we take our last breath, we would never give up hope. That you are going to move in our lives in miraculous ways, Father. But God, even if you don't,